While AU's student body is very diverse, their faculty might not appear to be. An article in the Eagle's AU student newspaper published a graph highlighting the lack of diversity within the different schools at AU. Jordan Sharp has more.
Racial diversity is climbing on college campuses around the country. However, while American University touts their own diverse campus, faculty diversity may be another story.
I think it would be an important point to be like, okay, like the student body is diverse, but I mean the faculty isn't necessarily.
Jillian O'Donohue is a freshman news assistant from the Eagle. After looking into AU's faculty breakdowns, she noticed that while AU's students are quite diverse, the faculty is over 75% white. However, while numbers don't reflect AU's student body, American's faculty isn't very different from other universities.
For the article, I also looked into like the national statistics of like breakdown of faculty diversity in like the country, and I mean AU's numbers are pretty similar to what it is around the country.
According to data gathered by O'Donohue and from the National Center for Academic Statistics, AU is actually ahead of the national average. However, the university still has a long way to go to keep up with their growing population of non-white students. In Washington, Jordan Sharp, District Wire News.
Here to join us today, we have American University faculty Professor John Watson. John Watson has pursued a PhD in mass communication and has been a journalist for more than 21 years. We also have Professor Dean Freelon, who is an assistant professor of communication, and he has published studies with various journals like New Media Society. And Professor Pallavi Kumar, who has more than 20 years of experience in public relations industry, and her work has been published in USA Today and the Washington Post. So I would like to welcome everyone and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
So I would like to start this panel off with a couple of statistics. According to the US Census, a little bit more than 62% of the population identify as white and non-Hispanic. About 77% identify purely as white. Now, AU's faculty is about 77% white as well. So I would like to start off with you, Professor Watson. If AU's faculty reflects that of the national population, then what exactly is the problem when it comes to diversity on campuses?
Well, the primary value of diversity is that it enriches a person's education. And if your education maintains the status quo, I would argue that it's not really an education at all.
Now, what do you mean by the status quo?
If your general perceptions about who is in leadership, who is intelligent, who is shaping the future of the country is static, I think your ability to be open and welcoming to change and progress is therefore limited. If you see leadership as being a static quantity, you're stuck there. You're stuck there. And it becomes revolutionary for you to just accept minor incremental change, which in a sense stops change or forestalls it falsely.
Professor Kumar, what do you think about these stats in terms of AU kind of almost mirroring the US population when it comes to university faculty? Is this something that universities think that they don't have to necessarily push a little bit further just because, you know, we're sitting right in this comfortable number?
Right. No, I definitely think universities should push it because I just view it the way that I myself as a minority view things. So in any business that I've worked in, or any workplace, or even as a student, I graduated from American University 20 plus years ago. And I think for me, if I see someone of color of my ethnicity, it makes a difference. And so I just think for students, it's the same, you know, it's the same scenario. And so of course AU should continue to push the envelope in terms of making faculty more diverse because it is more welcoming to students as our student population is changing as well.
Excellent. So, Professor Freelon, what is AU doing differently to address the sort of the demographic of faculty, if anything at all? And you can also maybe highlight some of your experiences with academia here at AU.
Sure. Well, AU is the only place I've actually taught as a professor, so it's difficult for me to address the question of what AU is doing differently. I think that AU, to a great extent, as the statistics show, reflect broader biases in society. You know, one of the issues that we deal with in communication is there's somewhat of a pipeline issue, specifically with regard to black males, but also more broadly with regard to people of other ethnicities as well. So in my PhD program, for example, I was the only black male the entire time that I was there. And you go to conferences and you see the exact same thing. So I think that when you get to the point of faculty hiring, there to some extent is a pipeline issue. There are also other issues that are related to hiring and tenure, but on the hiring committees, at least at SOC, we do try to keep diversity as one very important value that we consider as we're evaluating candidates for faculty positions.
So when you say pipeline issue, what exactly does that mean?
So a pipeline issue has to do with the number of people who apply for the educational credentials that are required to become a professor. So one of those is it's not absolutely required, but one of those in many fields is a PhD. So I can speak to that. I know there are many people on SOC who don't have PhDs, but there simply aren't that many individuals of African descent, I know this, who are entering those programs. So that becomes an issue when you're trying to look for people who have PhDs and trying to hire them. If there aren't that many people who start PhD programs, there won't be that many people who finish them, and so there aren't that many people who are in that particular demographic category who are going to be eligible for those jobs that do require PhDs.
So an issue and sort of the buzz when speaking to other students, Dominic had spoken to the panel earlier, but one thing that I felt that was really interesting just going around campus is who on campus is someone of color and how often do students see people of color. I've talked to a couple of students that said that when they go to the dining hall, when they take the campus shuttle, their perception of people, pretty much they're only seeing people of color when it comes to these service industry jobs. And when they look at their professors, most of them tend to be white, not Hispanic, not black, not Asian, not of any other ethnicities. So what would you say does that do in terms of people's perception, students' perception of color when they don't necessarily see it so much in the faculty as they do when they see it when people are actually providing them a service or swiping their card for their lunch?
Okay.
Yeah, we'll start with anyone.
Well, I mean, I think that is reflective of other areas in society, right? So the high status jobs tend to be taken by whites in this country. The low status jobs in many cases are taken by individuals of color. So I don't think AU is distinctive in that respect. I think it's something that's quite familiar to most students in other areas of DC and also other areas of the country.
Mm-hmm. Professor Watson, what do you think about that?
I think it ties back into my initial answer about maintaining the status quo. When you become accustomed to seeing black and brown people in lower level jobs, there's no real incentive or impetus to make that change because that's normal for you. And to seek change would be a revolutionary move, and people have to be highly agitated to move toward any sort of revolutionary movement. So when you see that, you say that's normal, I'm fine with it because I'm surviving with it.
Yeah. Professor Kumar, what do you think it'll take to kind of push change in that
Well,
direction?
I think, for me personally, as someone who graduated from AU, and I know that there's a lot of talk right now that the AU student population is changing. We have more Pell eligible, we have more first generation college students, we have more minority students, and so for me, I was a Pell eligible minority first generation. This is, I graduated in 1994. So what I just do is I make sure that students know my story because I feel like that in and of itself provides a comfort zone to them that they're not the only ones out there. And because, some of these qualities, I don't know if someone's first generation, I don't know if they're Pell eligible, but if I share my story, at least they understand that I get where they're coming from, and I try and weave it into conversations. I talk about internships a lot in my classes, but I tell them that I couldn't do an unpaid internship when I was in college because I'm trying to communicate to students that, look, not everybody is on the same, homogenous path. And so I feel like just if professors are open about their personal story in some respect, I think that really helps students because I know if I was a student at that time, back then we didn't even have these conversations. And so that in and of itself, that we have a news program, that university is doing so much training, all of those things make a difference. It doesn't feel like it because I think change is really, really minor and very slow sometimes. But the fact that we're even having the conversations, I would have loved that when I was in the position. back then.
Now, I graduated from an historically black college, university, Hams University. And HBCUs do a very good job of drawing students of color into their programs. American University, what do you think they could do to draw more people of color into a PWI? Because that's the terminology we use at HBCUs, PWI, predominantly white institution. Right. So what could you do to draw students of color to come to this university so that students of color aren't afraid to enter a university like this because they don't feel included? Especially when they look at the teachers, and the teachers don't look like them.
Right. I mean, I think AU is doing a good job of trying to draw more people and make the student base more diverse. The question is, what do you do to make people feel welcome once they're here? And that's what they have to establish. So they should have more mentorships with professors. They should have more connections for these types of students, because I think any type of personal outreach to students to make them feel comfortable, it can't just be first week freshman year. It's got to be a sustained approach throughout their entire time here that also ensures their success once they graduate.
Excellent. Professor Watson, what do you think about that?
I think it has to be an institutionalization of welcoming institutions. I think that one of the reasons why so many black people go to black colleges is because there are a lot of black people in black institutions there. That's simplistic. But this year was the very first time this university had a chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists. Okay, that's one of hundreds of student organizations. But if you're a black journalism student from high school, if you see that's there, that's a welcoming institution. Okay, you need more of those. You can't just have it appear and disappear. It has to be there. You have to have a bunch of those things. Black institutions have had bunches of those things. You have the gospel choir, you have these athletic organizations, you have these Greek institutions. I think institutionalized, welcoming institutions are part of the answer.
Professor Freelon, I want to ask you about your experience, if you can think back to undergrad. Sure. For yourself, or even going through your master's. What was it like for you as a black male going into college, especially with some of the statistics that we've heard earlier? 1 in 3 black men will see a jail cell within their lifetime. Right. There's also reports that about 60% of black males who do not have a high school diploma will most likely end up in prison. Now, here you are, you're a professor here at AU. Talk about your journey, and talk about maybe even to highlight some of the things Professor Watson said. What was welcoming for you, or what was your path in terms of making your niche in academia?
Sure. Oh my goodness. Well, I went to college a while ago. I attended Stanford University. And my experience, I think, was unique in a lot of ways, right? So all throughout my educational history, I'd been tracked into honors and AP classes. Most of my classmates, the vast majority, were white. But because I'd gone through that for so many years of my life, I was sort of socialized to see it as normal, right? So by the time I got to college, a mostly white environment did not really seem all that weird to me, because it had been just sort of a continuation of what I had experienced prior to that. So in my college experience, I guess I didn't really see anything as specifically welcoming, but I had already been socialized not to expect that, right? So what I did was I ended up just doing what I always did, which was to sort of move through the social milieu, if you will, find the people that I identified with, whether they be black, white, Asian, or whatever ethnicity that they were. And so I didn't have that expectation that someone was necessarily going to sort of reach out to me and to invite me in. I knew that I had to sort of make my own way, and I knew that if I was waiting around for somebody else to do that for me, then I'd be waiting a long time. So, and now I do want to say that I don't think that's the ideal way to go. I think it's kind of tough for people who haven't had the same background as me, but that's kind of how I made it through.
Excellent. So at this point, we'd like to, again, open it up to questions from the audience. Would you have any for our panel of professors?
Hello, I'm Constance Lindsay from the Department of Public Administration and Policy. One of the things that I think is pretty critical, besides the pipeline issue for faculty members, is that once we're here, we're often expected to engage in service and have other sort of out of our job description duties and activities that might take up more time to service students of color on campus. Can the panelists talk a little bit about supports that the university might might provide to faculty of color to help students of color who are here at the university?
We'll start with you, John.
Well, one of the things that happened to me when I arrived is that I was placed on as many committees as humanly possible. So they would have some color when people looked at the School of Communication. So, I mean, they made an effort to be welcoming, I guess. Virtually every freshman day, every event held where prospective students might be coming, I was trotted out. And I shouldn't say trotted out. I was happy to be there. I wanted to let prospective students of color know there'd be at least one, and I knew there would be more, people here would welcome and would be willing to help them. So in some sense, it's beyond what faculty members might be expected to do. But as a matter of personal responsibility, I mean, I accept that. I think it's real. I think it's necessary to establish a framework. Not everybody wants to be Rosa Parks. Not everybody wants to be Martin Luther King, to be the first one to do that. It's good when you see someone else has been in the water and it's going to be just fine.
Professor Kumar?
Well, I mean, I think that the university, just in terms of, it should be about training leaders. I mean, it shouldn't really matter what color you are. They should be training, providing more leadership training for people so that faculty, if they are being tasked with so much service, give us a path for success, make that count for something. That's what, my perspective is. It doesn't matter, whoever it is. If you're someone that's always teed up for service, then make that significant, make that count for something.
And we have another audience question.
Hi, my name is Deani Brown. I am a senior here in SOC, and I am president of the Student Advocates for Native Communities. I am among the less than 1% Native population here at AU. And it was very important for me to come out here today to see this. I thank you all for sharing. One of the experiences that I've had that was very enriching was last semester. I had 4 women professors, and 3 of them were women of color all at the same time. So that was very enriching to me. But at the same time, I also had a very enlightening experience going into some of the classrooms. For one, a history class opened with the frontiers where civilization meets savagery. So that was very disheartening for me to know that my peers are just being taught this mindset that it's just being recycled from the upper status quo. And I had a similar experience with a Native politics professor who was not Native, and some of the things that he was teaching were just not what he should have been worried about. Like, he was questioning my authenticity as opposed to it's a Native politics class. I was tribal council chairperson. I thought he should be more interested in, my experience in that. And there are just some things that I really appreciate, you guys sharing that. But I feel like some of the professors who are minorities, who are going to be teaching minority issues, should be not minorities, but that aren't minorities, that should be teaching minority issues, should be maybe have some experience in that minority, just so that we don't have those issues when you are teaching about a race that you might not be familiar with. And that was just something I wanted to share. Sorry.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your comment. I would like to again thank so much Professor Watson, Professor Kumar, and Professor Freelon for joining us here today. Thank you so much also to our studio audience for their questions. We would like to thank all of our guests here. This has been our special edition of District Wire News, a conversation about race at American University. Again, I'm Christina Anamashon.
And I'm Dominique Jordan. Good afternoon.